I've never been a fan of that whole coupe SUV trend. I mean, why get an SUV in the first place? You're sacrificing cargo space. You might as well just get a coupe. It does make it look a lot nicer though, especially this Infiniti QX55, but there's more to this vehicle than a coupe profile. The irony about the QX55 is that even though this category of SUV is relatively recent, Infiniti is trying to honor its past with it. Remember the FX in the early 2000s? Infiniti actually gave birth to this segment of vehicles. Before the Infiniti FX was born, SUVs were basically trucks with bodies on top of them, but Infiniti came up with the idea of fusioning an SUV with a sports car. It looked pretty cool and it was rather dynamic. It even had the same architecture and engine as the 350Z sports car. So with the QX55, it's really trying to go back to its roots. Infiniti is being very bold with this. This is a very risky move because it's trying to take on the compact luxury SUV coupe market. Now, we're talking about vehicles like the BMW X4, the Audi Q5 Sportback, and the Mercedes-Benz GLC Coupe. Now, will owners of these vehicles buy an Infiniti instead? I honestly doubt it. But hey, I mean, they're giving it a shot. There are no other Japanese brands right now that offer this kind of vehicle, and obviously the QX55 is more affordable than the German alternative, so why not? So here it is, a coupe version of the Infiniti QX50 that was released 2 years ago, hence the name QX55. Before I go ahead driving the new Infiniti QX55, allow me to talk to you about its engine, because it's quite different than what you usually find in other luxury compact crossovers. Yes, this is a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo engine like you get in pretty much all its competitors, but it's the first engine in the world to alternate its compression on the go. Infiniti calls it vcturbo, and when it came out 2 years ago, it was supposed to be the next best thing after Honda's VTEC. The idea being that as you're driving, depending on how you stomp the throttle, the engine will change its compression ratio accordingly, giving you on one side of the spectrum better fuel economy, and when you floor it, more power. On paper, it all seems quite promising. You're getting a total of 268 horsepower and 280 foot-pounds of torque. That's on par with some V6 engines. And before I drove this engine, honestly, I was impressed. I was like, finally, Infiniti is coming out with some cool Japanese technology. Finally, something that will allow it to stand up to the competition and be different. So, does it work? Come with me, we'll go for a drive, and we'll see what's what. So first, I'd like to take the time to say that I absolutely adore the way this vehicle looks. The QX50 wasn't ugly neither, but in QX55 form, the coupe profile and the more aggressive front end really look good on this vehicle. I mean, it's dynamic, it looks modern, and it looks different on the road. I've actually had quite a lot of people that looked at it and even asked me questions about the vehicle. Same thing inside, you're probably noticing these nice red seats. I'm driving, obviously, the high-end model. It's called the sensory trim level, and pricing for a QX55 will range between $54,000. This one is $63,000. That's not exactly cheap. So what are you getting? Well, I mentioned the variable compression engine under the hood. I'll get back to that in a few minutes. Obviously, all-wheel drive is standard for the entire QX55 lineup here in Canada, and that engine is coupled to a CVT transmission. Ugh, I know, I am also quite disappointed, but also confused. Why? Why would Infiniti put a CVT in a luxury vehicle? Now, we know that Nissan seems to be addicted with this kind of transmission. It's putting it in everything, but lately it's kind of backed away. The new Pathfinder will not have a CVT anymore, thank God. Now, the problem with this type of transmission is that not only does it make the engine feel like it's being strangled, I'll talk about that in a few minutes, Nissan CVTs have not been exactly reliable. They've had quite a lot of problems with them in the past. So I don't get why they're convinced that the QX55 should also have this kind of transmission, because It's also a bit sad because Infiniti went through great lengths to improve the vehicle's chassis rigidity. This is a good handling vehicle. It responds quickly, it has a nice resistance in the steering wheel, chassis dynamics are impeccable. And the power provided by this vcturbo engine is also quite impressive, but it's all ruined by the CVT transmission. I mean, when I floor the throttle, there's a delay, and then listen to that. It doesn't sound really good. It's quick though. I mean, once it gets up and goes, once the turbo knows what it's doing, once the computer has figured out the ideal compression ratio, and once that CVT launches everything like a big slingshot, you're going quite quickly in the QX55. So that's the positive note. But God, a CVT, why? Why? I mean, in the luxury car space, you want an automatic or a manual if possible, but in this category of vehicles, everybody makes an automatic. The Germans use a ZF unit, and some of them even use dual clutch transmissions. Nobody, and I mean nobody, stuffs a CVT in a luxury vehicle. Anyway, enough talk about the CVT transmission. Now I want to talk about the general driving experience of the QX55. It's an enjoyable vehicle to drive. Like I said, good handling, loads of grip. I'm about to hit a roundabout, and I'm going to get off onto a highway off-ramp, and I'm going to give this thing a try. I'm going to put it in sport mode because I have mode buttons, of course. This is going to change the characteristics. And in the corner, great grip. I cannot stand the sound of this engine. Traction control kind of wants to kick in though. I'm going to try to remove that. I don't even know where to do it. I don't have a button to remove traction control. I have to fiddle in the vehicle's settings. I'm going to go in driver assistance, VDC. I'm going to put that to off. All right, now let's give this a try a second time. No traction control. And there's a bit of understeer, gun the throttle. It finds grip, but that transmission just ruins everything. So you're probably wondering, Will, why are you pushing this thing in corners and why are you trying to see if it handles like a sports car? Well, because in the luxury vehicle space, whether it be an SUV, a sedan, or a coupe, you want to have some kind of driving dynamics. It's kind of like an unwritten rule where luxury car makers make vehicles handle well. They make them perform well. They're quick off the line. They have great technologies and good handling. If you look at vehicles like even Genesis, when they brought out the GV80, they made sure that it had good driving dynamics. The G70, the G80, same thing. Acura with the RDX, which is a direct competitor to this, well, the QX50, not in coupe form, but still, the RDX has much more engaging driving dynamics than this QX55. This doesn't feel like it wants you to push it hard on a winding road. Okay, so now we've dealt with driving dynamics. It's not the most athletic vehicle, but I'm sure it has other qualities. Like I said, it's got a nice design, and the vcturbo engine works well when you want power. Does it work for fuel economy? Unfortunately, it does not. I drove here, to get here at this filming location, I drove about 2 hours on the highway. The best fuel economy I was able to get was 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers. Now, you're probably thinking, well, 9.5 is quite good for a compact luxury SUV that has all-wheel drive. And you'd be right. But it's not revolutionary. You would expect this vcturbo business to get you much better gains in fuel economy, but you don't. I got 9.8 liters per 100 kilometers in a BMW M5. And even if you go with the V6 alternatives, they're going to get about the same fuel economy. So vcturbo doesn't really give you anything more at the pump. You are going to be adding complexity in the engine, however, and I'm not exactly certain that this thing is going to be reliable in the long run. So far, there hasn't been any issues with it. You can always trust Japanese engineering when it comes to reliability, but I have a feeling that when it's going to come time to start changing some components inside that engine, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg because it'll be the only engine of its type on the market. And Nissan isn't really milking this cow, which I find a bit weird. I would have loved to see this vcturbo engine with a manual transmission and say, I don't know, a Nissan Sentra SER Spec V. So back to this QX55. The cabin is comfortable, the seats offer good support, and I've got fantastic visibility all around. Wind noise is also kept rather low. Now, what are you getting for your $63,000? This is the top spec Sensory model. I have a heads-up display in front of me, and I have some quite fancy cabin materials. I mean, build quality is good, but it's not excellent. I mean, I can still get better from a Genesis. And then there's the issue that the QX55 is lacking crucial options. Now, you might find that I'm nitpicking here, but hear me out. When you're buying a BMW, a Lexus, or even an Acura of this price range, you're expecting to get things like, for example, wireless phone charging. I don't have this in this Infiniti. I have to use a cable. I also have analog gauges. The entire segment right now has digital gauge pods. Now at this point you're probably thinking, well, it doesn't matter, those are details, they're just creature comforts. And you're right, I mean, I am nitpicking, but in this price range, when you're paying $63,000 for a luxury SUV, you expect these kinds of things. Now, even that Buick Envision I reviewed not long ago offered you more for your money. Now, for some people, Infiniti has a certain value, but it's still kind of an odd brand. It feels like Nissan doesn't know what to do with the company. The QX50 and the QX55 are the company's only new-ish vehicles because there's nothing else modern in the brand. The Q50 sedan is good. In Red Sport, it's quite good, actually much better, but put it against a BMW 3 Series or again, a Genesis G70, and I'm sorry, but it just gets eaten alive. So the main problem with the QX55 is, although it looks really good, has a fancy interior, and it's pretty quick off the line, it falls short in the areas that matter for a luxury vehicle. It's not exactly dynamic, and I don't feel like I'm driving a luxury item. I'm also not getting a lot of value, which is weird because the idea of a luxury Japanese vehicle in the first place is to offer you a better bang for the buck than a German alternative. But it's not necessarily the case here. Infiniti also does a good job of not sacrificing too much cargo space and passenger space due to the coupe profile. Obviously, you're getting a slightly smaller trunk than a QX50, but the rear seat is surprisingly roomy and comfortable. I sat back there, and I'm a pretty big guy. If I can sit behind myself, it's a good sign. So that's a win from Infiniti. So, ample headroom. I got good leg room. Shoulder room is fine, and I can move this thing forward and back. I can also tilt it. Honestly, for a coupe SUV, this is actually the best that I've tried. Now, what I do appreciate is that the important functions are regrouped in physical touch buttons right here. I have audio, menu, and climate, and they respond quite quickly. Same thing for HVAC controls. I have them on the side so I can adjust the temperature. Infiniti did not default to only digital buttons for this. This is also fantastic, but if you still want to use the touch commands, you can do them as well right here on this screen. Okay, so now comes the time where I need to recommend this vehicle or not. I don't exactly know where to start. I mean, the QX55 looks fantastic. I'll give that to Infiniti. In terms of styling, they really nailed it. It has good power as well. That vcturbo engine is convincing when you're flooring the throttle, but everything is ruined by the CVT, and the fuel economy isn't really that great. Then there's the lack of important technology for the price. Remember, $63,000 for this bad boy right here. You'd expect this Infiniti to be fully loaded with all the latest technology that the Germans will charge you much more for, but you don't. You don't get this. Perhaps more importantly is that since Genesis is in the house and Acura really upped its game lately, we're all wondering, why would anybody go for this Infiniti instead? Infiniti, you need to listen to what I'm going to say very closely. You can't afford to make half-assed products anymore. Get that CVT out of there, put an automatic transmission, load this thing with standard features. Until then, rather than being an excellent compact SUV coupe, the QX55 ends up being a mediocre product.